Hello, my name's Gavin. This is Genre Books and a little bit of silliness this weekend. Next Thursday, after nearly 6 months of weekly episodes, I come to the end of my bookshelf tour. It's the biggie, it's all the books that were up there. The bookshelves have been rearranged since I've finished recording those, but I'm going to miss doing them, having them go out, and I've also now got a hole in my schedule which I've got to decide whether to fill or not. I'm also about halfway through the Read What You Own challenge, and I'm missing buying new books. So, to assuage my hurt on both these fronts, I'm indulging in a little fantasy. This is a dream book haul. This will be my best shelf. 10 books that if I owned them would be the best shelf on my bookshelves. This is not a tag because there are no prompts, but it is an open invitation if anyone wants to do the same. There are no limits to what you want to choose, but I think maybe we should put some guidelines in place, just 3 of them. Firstly, money. Now, money is no object because, let's face it, we're not buying these books. But although it's no object, I don't think it should be your sole consideration. Don't pick your 10 most expensive books you can think of. Just pick the ones that you really want. I've got a couple of very expensive ones on this list, but some of them I might even one day be able to own. Rule number 2, it's got to be a book you can actually read. I would love nothing better than to have an original Gutenberg Bible on this shelf. But I don't read Latin, so I can't have it. Your dream bookshelf should really consist of books you can actually make use of, not just objects to glory in. And rule number 3, the book has to exist. Now, it may be that this is a very short run of books of which none have come up for sale in the last 50 years, but if you know that there is one out there, that's fine. What you can't have is Hemingway's lost World War I novel somewhere on a train in France still. What you can't have is Charles Dickens' completed Mystery of Edwin Drood, because he didn't complete it. You can have any book that does exist. If you want the Book of Kells and you can read it, knock yourself out. What you can't have is some manuscript or incunabula which is mentioned in another work but doesn't exist. So no edition of Writings on Comedy by Aristotle. Sorry. That rule wasn't in place, I'd probably, find room in my best shelf for a copy of Cardenio. However, those are the only limits I want to place on it. So it's going to be a countdown leading up to the book I would most like to have on my bookshelves. And I'm only allowed 10, so let's go. I've got some poetry to begin with. In fact, the first two books are both poetry, which may be surprising to some people. But first, Tamerlane by Edgar Allan Poe. I've read some Poe in the last few months. I've got some Poe on my list to read very shortly as part of Project Rabbit Hole, and I've read my fair share of Poe in the past. I think maybe what attracts me to this is I'm not sure that I've read the poems that are in this collection, and I know that it's a rare edition of short print at the beginning of his career, so yeah, I'd be quite happy with that. The second is possibly even rarer and considerably older. It is the 1477 edition of the Canterbury Tales. Now, this is liminal for me on my self-imposed rule of being able to read it. I think I could read it slowly and struggling, and trying to remember some things that I was taught a great many years ago. This is one of the first books in what we will call English. It's possibly the most expensive or the second most expensive on this list as well. I'll try to come up with a bill for all of this after I've recorded, and although I said money's no object, it'd be fun to see what it might cost people. Number 8 on my list is not nearly as expensive as the Chaucer, but it might still end up costing a pretty penny. But it's a really important book for genre fiction in the 20th century. It's The Outsider and Others by H.P. Lovecraft. It is the book that brought Lovecraft back to public attention, and it is the first book printed by Arkham House Publications. And I have something else from the 20th century for number 7. This is a boxed set, but it's paperbacks. I think the first paperbacks on the list, certainly. This is as important to fantasy, perhaps more so than the Lovecraft was to horror and fantasy horror. And it is the Ballantine Lord of the Rings. Now, this is not the first printing of the Lord of the Rings. Now, I wouldn't turn it down if I was to have the original hardback copies, the original first edition Lord of the Rings. It's not even the first paperback edition. That was Ace Books. But it's because of that paperback edition from Ace Books that we have the Ballantine edition. These are the authorized editions. Tolkien never wanted The Lord of the Rings in paperback, but as good of a writer as he wasn't great in picking his lawyer, because there was a loophole in the US copyright that, the hardback was under copyright. Nothing stopping someone producing a paperback in the United States. Ace Books did so. Tolkien wasn't best pleased, but with the cat out of the bag, he had Ballantine produce the official version. Now, I have something sort of slightly related to that here, and that is Ballantine The Hobbit. Now, this is the 38th printing from 1972. The original, and I think The Hobbit came out at the same time as The Lord of the Rings, was from 1965. That is the one I'm choosing for number 7. At number 6, we're back to a pure British publication. 1984 by George Orwell, first edition, 1949. Top tip for American readers: if you can't afford $10,000 for a first edition 1984, just read a newspaper. Number 5 on my list isn't really a first anything. It's an early both things. It is The Sands of Mars by Arthur C. Clarke. Not this version, not this edition. This is my pan paperback from 1965 or so. What I want is the Gnome Press edition from 1952. I just want a Gnome Press book on my shelves. Out of all the books on the list, this is one I might conceivably at some point be able to get. This is not the first published Arthur C. Clarke. I don't think this is even the first edition of The Sands of Mars. I think that was a Sidgwick and Jackson from a few years earlier. But a 1952 Gnome Press is almost achievable. The first edition of this next book would also contravene one of my rules because it's in Spanish. Now, I did my GCSE Spanish 33 years ago, and I don't think it would help me here. It certainly wouldn't be enough to read this book. It's Fictions from Borges. This is the first, I'm going to go for the first US edition, because I think that comes out 3 years before the first UK edition. This is my favourite short story collection ever. It has The Garden of Forking Paths, Funes the Memorious, Death and the Compass, The Library of Babel, The Babylon Lottery, Tlon Uqbar, Albus Tertius, and Pierre Menard, author of Don Quixote. It's just fantastic. So, yes, a 1962 edition of this, please. But this has all been quite 20th century. Let's skip back one and go to the Victorian era, and I'm going to choose Vanity Fair from William Makepeace Thackeray. I don't feel I have to say any more than it's Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray, but it's, I think, my favourite Victorian book. And number 2, back to science fiction, and I think just counting as Victorian. I'll have to check that. The War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells, first edition, please. It did not begin science fiction, but it is one of the foundational books for what science fiction became. And it's just a great book in its own right. So I would like a first edition H.G. Wells, and if I'm going to have a first edition H.G. Wells, that's the one I want. Now, I feel I haven't been too greedy here. I have not gone for the most expensive books on every choice. So permit me this one. Shakespeare's First Folio. That's it. That's the top book. I mean, it's Shakespeare. I know I'm going to read it because, well, I'll be reading it in September. Not the first folio, admittedly. But that really would be something, even if it doesn't have Cardenio in it. Just a little daydream and an invitational, one I would urge anyone to have a go at as well. Like I said, it's not a tag because there are no prompts, but I am going to tag some people in this video because I would be very interested to see their choices for the 10 best books that they could ever own. Anyone who wants to do the same, tagged or not, please go ahead, post it. Make sure you tag me in so I get to see your choices. If you don't post videos, that's fine. Let us know in the comments. Tell me where I've gone wrong. Tell me the edition that I want. Tell me I'm a fool for wanting to spend that much money when there are better editions of Shakespeare to be had. But until next time.